And tonight we're just gonna have like a super casual conversation. Let me
Super
introduce.
casual is good. Super casual is good.
We usually have like a networking session at the end, but at the beginning, I'll do like a mini fireside chat. Everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll try to answer them as we go along. So Mohandass, I'll try to pronounce your name right.
You can call me Mo. Mo is easy.
Okay, Mo is easy, yeah. So everyone, Mo is the CEO and founder of Spenmo, the market-leading payment software for growing businesses that brings spend management, corporate cards, automated bill payments, approval workflows, and accounting reconciliation into an integrated suite. Prior to Spenmo, he had several roles from corporate strategy at Grab and management consultant at BCG. Tonight, we'll talk about his journey in building his startup, which he started in 2019, and in less than 2 years managed to raise one of the largest Series A rounds closed for YCOM-backed companies in Southeast Asia. So Mo, let's start from the beginning. I read that you were in the Singapore police force for almost 2 years, which is pretty cool and interesting experience.
It's mandatory first. It's mandatory first. So like, I had no choice to like not do it. Like, as part of national service, we had to do it. I think obviously in Jakarta, I don't think you guys have it, right? Like compulsory military service, yeah. But I did learn a lot from that, right? So after high school, you basically have 2 years of like national service before you can go on to like college. It was a good time for me to like, learn what the workplace is like, learn a bit of discipline as well. I think Singaporeans have a bit of a propensity to be a little spoiled, right? So I think like going through national service actually makes you appreciate basic things, right? And teaches you discipline, right? The way kind of follow rules, to kind of like make sure that you think about the broader good of the community instead of just yourself. But I think that was a good experience, right? Obviously, you don't want to become like a full-time police officer. I don't think that was the role for me.
Yeah.
So I didn't sign on and like do that full-time.
So after that, you became after college, of course, after university, you became a management consultant at BCG and then corporate strategy at Grab. Like, what did you get from those experiences? Did you also get your idea for Spenmo there?
Oh, good question. I think, when I graduated college, I was a pretty generalist, right? I did a econ and political science, like double major. Wasn't anything in hard science. I wasn't an engineer by training. So, and by the end of college, I wasn't like, hey, I want to do oil and gas. I want to do like financial services, right? I was pretty broadly interested in a lot of things, and consulting was the pathway for me to kind of like, okay, seems like I could learn a lot of interesting things there, get exposed to like a few industries. So I decided to go with consulting as like my first gig out of like college, right? And as luck would have it, a lot of my time at BCG, I did BCG Southeast Asia, so I worked in Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and a lot of my cases are actually financial services related. I worked a lot with like, this was back in like 2015, 2016. So I was working a lot of like the regional banks, like in India, in Southeast Asia, just as they were kind of thinking about digital banking, right? Trying to transition away from like physical brick and mortar kind of banking to like, hey, how can we onboard a customer without him ever kind of showing up at a branch, right? Well, I think big banks, incumbent banks, were just thinking about it. So to me, it was a segue into kind of like looking at what would it look like building a digital experience for a company that was like 100 plus years old, right? Kind of that's when I kind of like, I would say, got a bit of interest in like financial services. I wouldn't call it fintech because you're still building for like a very old school bank, right? But I was kind of interested in financial services. I think that was also towards the end of my tenure. This when I was kind of interested in building my own startup as well. But also, I made a conscious decision that kind of moving from BCG into Spenmo day one, they call it the equivalent of a startup day one, would have just been a bit suicidal, right? As a consultant, you don't actually operate a business, you don't manage P&L, you don't build anything, right? Like directly. So I was like, okay, if I want to build a startup, the best way to kind of like accelerate that learning curve would be to, let's go and to a bigger scale up at the point of time, and then learn from guys who've really built big businesses, right? So I think I was looking at a few like scale ups, and at that point in time, I think Grab really resonated with me, right? I think it was broad enough. They were doing a lot of things. They were like a market leading app. They had a huge like fintech vertical that they were just building out when I was looking at them in 2017, 2018. And it seemed interesting. It was a role which was like in a new team called like regional corporate strategy. So you get to oversee like Grab's overall strategy across all key markets, across all key verticals, right? And it's a bird's eye view of the business. So I went there, and to me that was my basically my way to learn, right? So I got to work with like Anthony, got to work with Ling, Ming, Ruben as well, who's a very close mentor of us. And he's also now invested in Spenmo. Like this is how I kind of like watch legends in action, right? Because at the end of the day, like nobody really teaches you, you're a founder. So your best job is to, what you want to do is learn from other guys who've been there and done it, right? And grab was my time to learn. So, and it's lucky to have it there. As part of the regional strategy team, I got seconded to like payments group. So I was seconded to Grab Financial Group. So that's when I launched a bunch of things with them. I launched Grab Pay, Grab Lending, Grab, wealth management. I looked at a lot of things in the Grab Financial Group vertical, right? And I think eventually that's when, I got an idea from there. Initially, the story was that we're actually looking at building like a Spenmo equivalent within Grab. We spoke to a lot of Grab Pay merchants. And a lot of the feedback was, hey, why can the Grab Pay wallet only collect money from customers, right? And why do I have to withdraw to a bank account to actually process all my payables, right? They were like, I would just love to like basically schedule my invoices, my payroll, my supplier payments, all from the Grab Pay merchant app. So I think those were the early signs that were like, there were merchants who were asking for it. And I think, Grab is just a massive beast, right? You have so many projects, you can't do everything at the same time. So in that point in time, I think they realized that they didn't want to prioritize this project and they wanted to focus a bit more on the B2C element. So our job, I think eventually like me and my co-founder just figured out that this could be a big business on its own and it could be a standalone business. So I think that's the story. And after my time at Grab, that's when I left to do Spenmo.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you have a feeling that Spenmo was going to be a hit then?
No, honestly, like for a few months, even now, like, you never know, right? Like I think 2019, it felt really, really early. And I think it's just like, I think now, obviously on hindsight, everything looks good, but I think back then it felt really, really early. A lot of the early investors, were kind of telling us like, dude, nobody's going to like use software in Indo, right? Or in Southeast Asia, people will just use massive finance teams and Excel sheets. Like they're comfortable with that, they won't change. So in 2019, it did feel early, but I think we had some tailwinds from like digitization, which actually accelerated a lot of the adoption of like software. So I think we're definitely very lucky in those aspects, right? Because I think to kind of build a startup from day one, you need, obviously the product has to be good, the team has to be good and all those things, but you also need like market timing. And I think what a lot of founders don't admit is a lot of luck. Like it's a lot of things that I didn't control, but turned out to be good for Spenmo.
Could you explain Spenmo in the simplest way possible? Like, for example, to a 5-year-old, like what problems are you exactly trying to solve with Spenmo?
Yeah, I think we just help companies pay out for the stuff. That's probably the easiest way. I have a son, he's like 18 months old, so he still doesn't understand that picture. I'm pretty sure once he grasps words, I think that's the easiest way to kind of explain Spenmo to him. So I think, obviously we focus a lot on the payables, which is money out of the company. And it's a conscious decision for us to kind of be focused.
Yeah, I want to touch on that later on, but going back to the beginning, like what were and are currently your biggest challenges in growing Spenmo?
A lot of it is like, I think twofold, right? I think one is like on the category side, I think it's a lot of market education. Like you need to invest to create this category, right? We're building payment software, right? Like payable software didn't exist before us. So I think there's a lot of creation of content, education and campaigns to kind of educate CFOs and finance teams that, hey, there's a better way of doing things that if you use 20 people and takes thousands of man hours every single month at your company that you've been used to doing, right? That you should change, right? So getting people to kind of change and get that, that eureka moment, like, hey, this software actually allows me to save time and money, which are two important things for any company. It's maybe time for me to have a look at it, right? So creating that point of like, let's have a look at a demo, let's have a look at the product. I think that's going to be really, really important. And kind of doing it at scale, I think is the big challenge, right? Which is why we rely on a lot of our partners. Rely on accounting software that we partner with, accounting firms, this, and obviously our customers and their employees, which becomes word of mouth for us, right? Like they have to spread the word, right? Word of mouth becomes quite important for us when you create this category. And I think that will be challenging as you go into every single new market. I think the second thing is just like talent. I think, I'm probably not new, like every single startup founder at our stage will tell you that hiring and retaining and motivating talent will be the biggest challenge right now, right? Because I think early on when we started, like to be honest, obviously you every single founder wants to hire rock stars, right? Every single LinkedIn post is, hey, we're looking for a rock star. Yeah, okay, rock star to join Rocket Ship. Every single startup talks about that, right? But honestly, like early on in like, at the pre-seed stage, like, man, beggars can be choosers, right? I can't wait for like a rock star to like start a company for 6 months, right? We just got to go, right? But I think once you have a bit of capital, you have a bit of product market fit, then you start raising the bar, right? And the plan is to keep raising the bar so that, eventually like the guys that I hire out are guys that in a parallel universe, I would have worked for them instead, right? So I think that's the, if I'm hiring a C-level guy or like a senior manager or senior management role, like my decision making is very simple. Like if I was flipped and I was in an interview process with them, would this be managers that I want to work for, right? And work with and learn from them. I think talent is a big one. And I think, talent density in this part of the world, Southeast Asia, is not as dense as it is in the US, right? So good talent, especially in like fintech and software, very, very rare. And our job is to like hunt them down. And after hunting them down, is to like basically convince them that we are right for them and to join us. There's a big challenge, right? So I get involved in a lot of like, until now, me and my co-founder, we do all the final rounds of the interview. And we have like 200 plus people now. So you can imagine the funnel of interviews, right? You don't hire everyone you interview. But for us, it's an important mandate, right? Which is like, you want to get the best talent in, right? And I think that's something that's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges was market education. Like how many % of the team did you spend on like product versus sales?
Yeah, we don't do super big sales teams, right? I think it's a product that like, we do a bit of like marketing, also not a lot, right? I think a lot of it is like that's what I would say we're a bit more under the hood because a lot of like, I would say half our talent right now is in product and engineering. So, because again, we're building software, right? We're not building a fintech company. I actually stay away from the whole tag of being a fintech company. I think we're very focused on just being how to build good, sticky workflow software, right? And in this part of the world, they're quite rare. So our job is to just make sure that we ship the best product out, people like us, and over time they're sticky, and we become a big company. I think that's the plan.
I'm curious because I'm also building my own business. Did you build your product from zero with your internal team, or did you outsource it at the beginning when you had maybe less capital than right now?
Good question. I think the way we can't thought about that decision was in a simple framework, right? Which are things that are like critical to success that I must own, right? That can be delivered with like good quality, right? And versus things that I didn't really have to own. They're kind of important, but like wouldn't kill the business if they were outsourced, right? So for me, it was like all the payment rails, the infrastructure on like payments, like we had to own in-house. So engineers would have to be in-house even from day one, right? Too sensitive. We had a lot of data, right? There's a lot of like security and AML, KYB, KYC, all those things had to be so critical to success because like it's do or die. So those things we had to build in-house. Things that we outsourced early on was basically like, I would say marketing. We're not super big on marketing. I didn't hire those guys early on. We still don't have a big marketing function, not a big focus for us. And also like the UI UX. Initially, we actually outsourced it to a design house in Philippines. Because again, I think the actual workflow and the UI, is something that we could outsource early on. Obviously, if you ask me whether I would love to have it in-house, I would have loved to have it, right? But I think engineering, we had to like build from day one in-house. Other things we could outsource. So I'm not a big fan. If you're asking me like if I'm a big fan of like outsourced dev shops,
yeah,
I don't think so. I think just because our model touches money, right? So very sensitive, and it's hard to outsource that. I think we're building any model that is like, like maybe e-commerce enablement, logistics, right? And things are fairly simple enough to outsource. There's a clear architecture where you can say, hey, this is what's owned by an outsourced dev. This is owned by in-house team. I think then you should kind of approach that way.
Yeah, thank you for the great advice. So right now you're currently hiring massively for positions across Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, and you're also hiring for expansion in Thailand, Japan, Korea. And you already mentioned how different the SMBs are in Singapore versus Indonesia. Is there any fear at all that you're expanding too fast to too many countries, considering their unique personalities?
I think again, like our key to success will be localization, right? So we do have like very strong country teams that will focus on SMBs in each of these countries, right? And our plan will always be to like, if we think the product quality is not good enough to like ship even an MVP stage, we don't do it. right? Which is a bit contrarian to advice that you get. Like we went through YC. YC will tell you to ship shitty product, right? Like from day one. But I think in our business is B2B. So once a customer doesn't like you, they don't come back. I think consumer, you can ship an MVP that's like pretty crappy and they'll complain about it and churn off. But when you have a new product, they might actually come back. In B2B, like if the CFO or finance team is pissed off, they don't come back. So you don't want to actually ship a crappy MVP, which is a bit contrarian, right? But I think that's the way we kind of think about it. We just like localize the product, get it up to like a minimum livable standard, not minimum viable. I think that's the difference for us. And then once you're there, then then you should have a good team to kind of go to market with it.
Interesting. Okay, what would you say your leadership style is? And can you give us some tips, like among all of the founders, participants here, how Spenmo is ranked so high in Glassdoor? Like, what is your leadership style?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
that's a good question. I think like Spenmo culture initially, like, you kind of outsource it. It's not something that lives in a document. I think it's something that like me, my co-founders, my management team, like kind of like do every day. I think it's kind of like my style, my personality, which is like, I work hard, but I play harder as well. So we have a very fun team culture. The pride's obviously on like high quality work, but I don't think to be successful and to actually build a big company, I think the whole point is having fun along the way. So I think that's been a big part of like our culture as well. And I think now one of the things we kind of found is that there's basically like 3 core values that Spenmo kind of abides by, right? Number one is basically, basically understanding that you want to be hungry to win, right? So like people that we get in, have to pass this test of hunger, right? Like being driven and being motivated is like really, really important, right? And second, basically being someone who's like not someone who's really, kind of like straight to the T, someone who's willing to ask why not, take an unconventional path, right? Those are things that we kind of value for during the interview process. And that helps to kind of maintain the talent density, right? Because if they're hungry, motivated people who join you, they're curious and inquisitive and they don't stick to the norm. And the number 3 thing that we kind of added to the checklist is making sure that they're not like jerks, right? That they are collaborative, they're in a good team, they're a good team player, right? Those 3 things we found out actually leads to like a really good recruiting process. If you kind of screen for those 3 values. So number 1, being hungry, being driven. Number 2, basically asking why not, being inquisitive and creative. And number 3, just being a team player, right? Like, I think Netflix kind of categorizes in their culture deck as basically like don't be an asshole, right? Which is like something I think is like pretty, it's hard to ask directly, right? But like when we do a couple of reference checks, we kind of screen through the interview process with a few questions, like, do they actually kind of fit well in the team? And I think that's basically like me and every single hiring manager's job at Spenmo, which is to make sure that people who join meet all these 3 criteria so that existing people plus the new joiners have a good time, right? Like if you stop doing all those things, your team very quickly goes from like a AAA density to like A- to B. Very quickly the team starts, right? So that's not great. And if you don't have like checks and balances on like team players, then you have like really good guys who don't gel well on team, and over time the team culture does as well. So we do take it seriously. We try to screen for it, but again, my co-founder, not my co-founder, but one, my CEO was from Uber before, and Uber was known for having like a crazy good hiring culture and like hiring methodology, right? And he always tells me, even at a big organization like Uber, they only get the right decision 70% right, 70% of the time. So, as a startup, we're allowed for a bit more flex on that than the 70% rule, which means that if you're kind of getting 60%, 70% of the people right, hiring decisions right, we basically have to like keep letting go of the people who don't fit very quickly. That's part of the job. So it's not pleasant, but it's necessary for the collective kind of like, performance of Spenmo, right? To make sure that it kind of continues to thrive as a good company. But yeah, I was surprised by my Glassdoor reviews as well. Pleasantly surprised. People were like, hey, you should go check your Glassdoor review. And I was like, when I found it, I was like, shit, okay, let's go to like, let's go post on LinkedIn and tell people that we have a good culture. It was incidental, right? Which shouldn't be the case. I think culture is something that, honestly, I should have thought very deeply about from day one. But, obviously you're thinking, more important to like launch the product, get customer feedback. But I think a lot of like more senior founders, like further on along the journey, have told me not to like underestimate it. So I think it's probably the advice that I'll give others aspiring founders as well, which is kind of like culture once it's set, from day one, is very hard to undo.
Yeah.
right? So you want to get it right early on. If not, change very quickly, right? Make sure that kind of say, hey, we didn't take culture very seriously, but this things can't happen anymore at the company. This is what we live by. These are all our principles. Anybody who doesn't conform to these principles, either you conform to it or you go, right? And I think that's where the management team and the hiring managers have to make a decision. Like, it was very clear that someone on the team doesn't exemplify those principles, is allowed to like kind of stay on and even get promoted, then it sends the wrong message, right? That hey, Spenmo doesn't take its culture very seriously.
Yeah, really valuable tips. Thank you. How about your co-founders though? Like, how did you find them, and how do you manage to find like those who will complement your skills as well?
That's a great question, man. I think like finding co-founders, like finding a life partner. A lot of it's like, I think we can have a bit of network and like, you can like do your proper search as well. I had a lot of like potential co-founders from Grab as well. So I was very lucky to be in like a startup ecosystem there, where there were a lot of people, even on the tech side, on the engineering side, they were looking to leave Grab to like build their own startup. But I found Isak actually at a General Assembly event. We had been introduced by a mutual friend. We took a couple of like, we went to some of the networking events, right? This was pre-COVID, so like you had networking events in person. Go out like a couple of tech masterclass talks and all that. And then we just gelled. I think a lot of it was just around the way that we operated as people, not so much like skill set wise, but he's just a person that complemented me. Right? I'm very business, commercial, BD. He's very tech engineering focused, but I think we kind of make a good team because we have core values that are very similar to each other. I think actually finding a co-founder is not easy. So if you want to like start a startup, like you need to like cast the net out wide, right? Co-founder is not going to just end up in a lab one day and say like, hey, I want to build something really big. A lot of it's like talking to networks of people who have exited companies, right? Like we look at companies now, they're on the verge of IPO. That's the perfect time to go and find a co-founder, right? Because they have some liquidity, they're looking to do something new. A lot of great early stage guys, they don't want to be part of a publicly listed company. They want to go and do something 0 to 1 again. So it's your job to go and find them.
Yeah. Speaking of networking, you raised $36 million by Insight Partners, YCOM, Salesforce, angel investors who are executives at Grab, Stripe Indonesia. How did you manage to gather all of this amazing investors? Like, what was the journey like?
A lot of it as a startup founder early on, like your job is number one, obviously to find product market fit, the elusive concept. And obviously the product is the most important thing, getting your metrics up. But second part of your job as like a CEO founder, right, is to raise capital for your business, right? So a lot of it is early on, a lot of these guys I spoken on very early on, and they were just like, hey, too early, you guys haven't done this, you guys haven't done that, come back here. And a lot of your job as a CEO founder is to make money, big financing available for the company, right? Because you can have all these grand ideas of like how big you're going to be and what you're going to launch. But if you don't raise money for the company, you don't actually get to execute all those plans. So it's your job to go out and make money, right? And get money for the company. So a lot of this were actually conversations I've been having for over a year, right? Like, telling them constant updates, updating them on the business progress, and also staying close, right? It's very rare that you kind of suddenly go to investor tomorrow and then suddenly they give you don't give you a term sheet the following week. I like to think of investing and as startups in the whole community as a relationship, right? It's not transactional, right? It's a relationship that has win-win situations for both of us, right? And at the end of the day, like I think there's plenty of money in the world out there. Like I try to pick investors that I really can see myself forming a good relationship, like for the best part of a decade, right? Because if Spenmo goes big, like that's what you're talking about, like 10 to 20 years of working together as the same people on the table, right? So that's a long time. Investors are this unique bunch where you can't really say bye to them after a year, right? If things are going well, they stay on. So a lot of it is like nurturing relationships. So I think a lot of founders sometimes forget that, investing or raising money is not just a one-way kind of DD process. It's not just VCs and funds that are looking at your company. As a founder, your job is to make sure that and screen that VC as well, right? So like every single VC that we're kind of taking money from, we do ref checks on them, talk to their portfolio founders, right? And ask them, have they been helpful? Have they kind of said, have they kind of done all the things they said they would do for you? Because on a VC call, like, dude, VCs will tell you anything to take your money if you're hot, right?
Yeah.
And, they will give you founders that, another tip is that they'll give you founders they want you to talk to. Your job as a founder is to go and find the guys they don't want you to talk to, right? You just kind of look at some of the portfolio companies that they haven't done really well on, right? And that really shows you how good a VC fund is, like how good as a fund that they are, right? Because if they support the companies that are not doing as well, and they've tried their best to get the company to perform, and not just kind of cast them aside, then it's a good sign that they're like good long-term partners, right? Because not every single bet that a VC makes will become a 10x bet, right? So I think there's something that is important for founders to do a DD. It's not a one-way process; it's really a two-way one.
Two-way due diligence. That's interesting. Did you cold call all of these investors, or did you manage to know them through connections?
It's a good question. I think like I was very lucky because of the Grab connection. Like, as a corporate strategy team, I'll work a lot of the corporate finance side that raises money for Grab. So I was involved in a few fundraising rounds as well. And a lot of them were investors that I already knew from the Grab contacts. So that was the initial list. But obviously after that, you talk to a few investors, you got some connections. You talk to other founders in the ecosystem. They raise some money from some fund that you like. You ask them for a warm intro. There's a lot of schmoozing, right? And it's not just cold calling. I think it's like really kind of like being strategic about like who you want in a cap table and who's going to add value to you as well, right? Because there's like probably 1,000 funds in Southeast Asia. If you're just cold emailing all of them and not having a good strategy, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Right. But if you kind of say, okay, this 10 funds have kind of backed a similar model in other part of the world. They do B2B, at least for us, right? They do B2B, they do fintech. It's a core thesis for them. Then you're being smart about fundraising, right? And finding the right partners for your journey. So I think as a founder, like, it's very tempting to just spray and pray. Just download this list, send the same email to everyone. But then VC funds also know that you're just like spraying and praying and you're not putting in effort as well. Right. So like I don't do more than like honestly 10 investor connects at the same time, 10 to 20 max. And then see how the process goes. Like slowly start the process, try to batch them together, and then quickly get feedback. It's like emailing 1,000 guys. They all tell you your pitch sucks, or you need to change all these things.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I'm gonna go back to your product. So you mentioned in one of your interviews that you encountered how different the business mindset is between in the US and Southeast Asia. People in the US don't mind spending money to save time, whereas in Southeast Asia, they don't mind spending time to save money. Is this still true? And have you found a pitch that seals the deal among, especially students?
I think that's a good question. I think it's kind of like what Kent was asking in the chat as well, right? Which is what is the customer segment? What's the pitch? Our pitch is like very clear. We don't go after a micro segment. So like in Indo, like Warren segment is huge, right? And our very good friends at Bukukas and Buku Warren who are running that show, and it's a segment that we will never get into. We really go after like fast-growing SMBs, tech companies, all the way to like mid-level size companies, right? So we don't do enterprise, we don't do like micro entrepreneur warm size, right? That's really our customer segment because what we've seen is that once a company hits like 20 people, that's when communication about finance systems, spending and payables gets fairly complex, right? It's not a one-man show, right? If you have a 5-man team, like it's fairly easy for the for payables to kind of be centralized. But once you hit 20 people, it gets a bit messy, right? So the pitch has always been, hey, we help you save all this time and money, right? And I think one of the things in Indo that's very, very sensitive is because it's a very labor-intensive role, like accounts payable teams that are just like labor, right? And people always get scared that Spenmo is going to replace all the labor, right? And that's not our job. Like maybe the technology will, right? But like our vision has always been to empower finance teams, right? Which is like now you spend 50% of your time doing all these things that Spenmo can do. Our job is to give you 50% back of the time back, so you can do things that Spenmo can't do, right? Which is at the company level, going to the details of FP&A, forecasting, trying to think how you can procure better, how you can save money for the company better. Those are honestly things that Spenmo can't do, right? I can't tell you as a business, these are things that you should replace, right? I can tell you how much you spend. I can tell you spend all those things, but I don't have a strategy how you're going to replace the vendor, right? We don't have, I think at some point maybe somebody will build AI-driven kind of spend insights, the ability to actually make smart insights. But I don't think it's ever going to replace a human, right? Because the company is so specific and so detailed, right? It's something that's very hard to replace. So I think that pitch has worked really well, and I think like I said, COVID hasn't been so much of a negative. It's kind of accelerated a lot of digitization. I think people now CFOs just realize that, dude, if something can be done with a software, then a bunch of people, software is the way to go because again, software doesn't fall sick, software doesn't have COVID, it's cheaper. And again, I think a lot of people, we don't pitch the labor savings, but a lot of it's just like labor efficiency, right? The existing labor in your finance team just is able to do a lot more higher value added stuff.
Okay. So this is my last question. So I'm going to open the question and answer to the participants. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat right now. My last question will be, well, actually, I have a few more questions, but I'm going to limit it to one. You seem to be focusing on going deep and building category defining business. Could you elaborate why you chose this instead of going wide like the other players? And also one more question is how you create that feedback loop and continuously improve your product.
Those are good questions. I think the one that was, we want to be a little contrarian and just go deep and focus on product quality. I think it stemmed a lot from my experience at Grab. I think Grab is great. They have a super app. I think early on in the journey, those things were painful because a lot of things were not well functioning, not well built. And a lot of it just seemed like modules they just lump on together, and like you kind of hope that the collective experience is good. But I think first we kind of realized that people always thought that in our space, Spenmo would try to do what we do today, the payable stuff, and then become a bank, right? And I think a lot of it, again, was my experience from Grab. Like one of the last things I did at Grab before leaving was the digital banking license application and thinking about the strategy to become digibank, and I have no interest in doing that again. And I think it's just from that focus, right? I think one of the things I learned from Grab is the ability to kind of focus and get things done right. And I think our thesis is very simple. Like, to build world-class software, you don't need to become a bank, which is why historically banks have not built great software, right? Because it takes a lot of bandwidth and resources and capital to become a good, decent bank, right? And I was like, if banks haven't been able to do it, like, why is Spenmo trying to do it with like 34 million in the bank, right? It's a small sum of money to what banks have. So if you try to do what banks do, plus try to build world-class software, like we'll kind of be a jack of all trades. We won't be good at anything. So I think, I think this also comes a lot from a YC's advice, which is like, you want to build something for someone, right? And not build a lot of things that means nothing to everybody, right? So I think that's the focus for us. And hopefully we're right, like maybe we're wrong. Maybe we should have become a bank, who knows, right? But I think the thesis and all the data, I think founder level decision making at this point is really a mixture of art and science. So there's data, but there's also a gut feel that we don't need to do it, right? So, we'll see whether I'm right or not, right? There's a recording of this. So maybe in a few years we become a bank and I'm like, shit, yeah, I should have done that quicker. Who knows? Nobody knows.
Yeah. Yeah, so if there's any questions from anyone, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. This is a, networking session, so you can feel free to.
Yeah, feel free. Like, nice, like, happy to answer anything. Like, anything that can be helpful for you, for your business. Have about 2.5 years of on the ground experience now.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting like high quality mentoring session right now.
I paid the price for these lessons, man.
Yeah, Kent here has a question.
Yep. Thanks for arranging the session, Jess, and thanks Mo for sharing your experience. Can you hear me?
Hello, Kent.
Yeah.
Yes, loud and clear.
Cool. So I guess following up on the question I was sharing in the chat on the focus customer segment, right? So I was wondering about what kind of incentive do you give out for these people to onboard Spenmo, and do you see that as something that is sustainable?
That's a good question. I think like obviously now the market has been a like market acquisition, like customer acquisition phase. So we give a bit of discounts on the subscription price. We throw in a bit of cashback on the cards. We give discounts on the FX. Is it sustainable over 5 years? I don't think so. But again, like our plan right now is to acquire customers, get them in early, because every single software has kind of gone through this transition, which is like get the customers on first, because then you get data from the customers, right, on how they actually use the product. That's the most important thing at this stage. And for that, we're willing to give away some of the margin, right? And then a lot of it is basically kind of thinking about like what's the long-term plan, right? So this is something that we think about, our strategy thinks about, is like, when can you reduce the subsidy once customers get a bit sticky, right? So I think it's a mixture of both. You want to acquire customers, but you don't want to be gross margin negative at the same time. This is something that 100% I learned from Grab as well, right? Which is I wanted to build a profitable business very early on, right? So I think it's a mixture of both. You want to be don't want to be too aggressive on the discounts where like customers will feel like once the discounts are taken away, they're like, shit, like I don't want to use Spenmo, right? The only benefit has been the discounts, right? And that's obviously not your ideal customer. The ideal customer should be the one that enjoys the workflow, the approval engines, the accounting reconciliation, the access to virtual cards and all these things, right? That's the ideal customer. So I think we'll figure that out over the next 18 months.
That's a good point. And if I may follow up on that question, talking about acquiring customers, versus some of the other, first movers in the market or some other competitors in the market, do you think about focusing on the segment that is like head to head to them, or think about acquiring the customers that they are not currently focusing at?
Yeah, honestly, like at our point, I've spoken to a lot of VCs, and I think one of the things that we found talking to our customers as well is that honestly, the market is just so large in Southeast Asia, right? This is not a winner takes all kind of model, right? So, we'll eventually, if you look at the US, you'll start seeing like Spenmo for tech startups, Spenmo for FMB, Spenmo for just like logistics companies. There even is a construction company kind of focused product on the Brex model side, right? So like all this vertical SaaS is coming up in the US, right? And I think Southeast Asia is early, right? Which is why everybody feels like they're doing everything. But I think it's a market that is like so large that can support, like I would say, quite easily, like 3 to 4 really big companies in this space. So if you're kind of asking me like whether I kind of stay up at night thinking about our competitors, honestly, no. Like our big challenge is like thinking about ourselves and like making sure that we are focusing on the right feedback from customers and building the best product, right? That our customers are asking us to do. Like that's something that keeps me up at night.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot. I'll leave more time for some of the others who have some questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian.
We have a question here from Charles. What do you think makes Spenmo different from your competitors?
That's a good question. I think it's just kind of like a lot of it is kind of like on the focus side, right? I think there's a lot of competitors who are doing what we do and trying to say, hey, we'll become your business banking, we'll become the neobank, which is a big play in UK and Europe and in US as well. And I think first we kind of just figured out that there's a whole segment of customers that are not looking for another bank, and they really want just like good payable software. So I think it's a different segment. Like again, I think segments of customers that want a bank account with some payables capabilities into it, great. That's like alternatives in the market. And for companies that already have like 8, 9 bank accounts across the region, and they're really looking for like a payables orchestrator, that's where we come in, right? That's really, really like our strong point, right? Which is like, I don't care whoever you bank with. I'm not going to become your bank, but I can be that payments quarterback for you, right? Or an orchestrator for your payments. So I think that's what we do. And a lot of it's like teaching this category of customers, which is why they're fairly bigger size customers, right? We don't go after customers that are looking for their first bank account or just incorporated. That's not really like our ideal segment.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Charles. There's another question from Mukesh. Feel free to unmute, by the way, Mukesh, if you want.
Oh, I saw Mukesh's question.
Yeah, so Mukesh asked, in the view of varying set of regulations for fintechs in the region, how would you scale up?
That's a good question. Like obviously, like we're the intersection of like software and fintech, right? So like one of the things that we have always relied on has been like to build great software, the focus needs to be on it as much as possible, and which is why we kind of basically stayed away from the tag of like being a fintech company, right? Because fintech company comes with the whole how would I say, not the burden, but a bit of the responsibility to have a license, right? To be a licensed regulated player. And then when I kind of look at the space of what we're operating in, payment software on its own, we interact a lot with payments providers and license providers, which basically allows us and gives us the leverage to kind of say like, hey, I'm going to focus on building the software. And for anything that touches a regulated activity, I'm going to use payment providers, right? So we partner with like a lot of providers on the card issuing side, on the credit side, on the bill payment side, sending money abroad, like all those things are basically things that we partner up with. And I think this is something that we have been very, very focused on, which our whole strategy has been to be licensed-like, right? Because being licensed basically means a lot of your product engineering and your bandwidth goes into being compliant with those things. And we want to stay as much as possible to being like a payment software company than a fintech payments company. So it's a distinction, right? Which is why we work a lot with like payment providers that are licensed in each country, right? Which I think kind of ties into like Adrian Lorenzo's question as well, which is, we work with like, remittance providers who are licensed in each country that we're in. so that we can really focus on building like great sticky workflow software.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. Does anyone else have any questions? We still have some time. Yes, Kent?
Yep, if I may unmute myself again. So we'd love to learn more about, the SME segment is a segment with, as the name suggests, a lot of small customers. And thinking about the BD strategy in terms of how to acquire them can be a headache, right? If you have, your BD folks cold mailing or cold reaching each one of those, it can be arguable whether it's worth the effort. If you want to create the kind of incentive scheme for them to become more like inbound leads, and try to capture those inbound requests, then you might be missing out some of the bigger fishes. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on how you balance that, and just overall the BD. What do you think about the BD thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think go to market, I mean, you have the best product, but if you don't distribute it well and you don't go to market well, then your startup will die, right? Your company will die. So I think for us, if you kind of think about the spectrum, basically, a company's product can be either marketing led, it can be sales led, or it can be product led, right? And I think for now, Spenmo's at the phase where we're trying to figure out whether we are marketing led or sales led. So a lot of it is just kind of figuring that out, right? I don't think we're a product led company because there's very few like viral network effects within the business itself. It's very B2B, right? Viral network effects are mainly for, I would say, like SMB, like very small businesses or like consumer, right? So once you kind of figure out that, hey, it's a marketing or sales-led product, then you kind of run some experiments, right? So again, the way I kind of see it is interchangeable, right? Is it a product that marketing can kind of educate the market on its own and basically get the customer or prospect through the funnel to sign up and transaction? At this stage, I think it's quite early because, like I said, we're creating this category, right? Which means that the ads will help, but the ads on their own can't close all the way to a transaction, right? So then very quickly, you kind of realize, okay, marketing, not ready yet. Product, we're not there, right? It's not a product-led growth kind of company. Right? Today is like, for now, sales, right? Because, people need to come onto a demo. We also target slightly bigger businesses, right? Which is like 20 to, like our ideal size is really 50 to 100 people, companies. And that means that you're talking to CFOs, head of finance teams, there's a few like qualifying calls. And a lot of it will be kind of making sure that the sale can go through. It's not something that people see an ad, they sign up, and then it's done, right? So I think that's the way we kind of thought about like go to market for Spenmo product.
Yeah, Kent, do you have any follow-up questions?
Sorry, couldn't unmute myself just now. I saw that it was disallowed by the host, but now I could. No, yeah, thanks for that response. That makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, I think we're still figuring things out. I think a lot of people think that startup founders have like everything pat down, and I think the way we I think honestly the best founders I've seen are guys who are able to kind of like get with the tune, right, and quickly change their perceptions of things based on data. So I think we'll learn a lot of things in the next 6 months, 12 months, and maybe my answer will be different in a few months. Who knows?
Indeed, it's about jumping off the cliff and build a plane on the way down.
That's right. I think Morris has a question. Is a bit more tactical. Morris, if you leave me your email, or if you give just your email, I can have my team reach out to you. I'm not super updated 100% on like the latest pricing from Indo, and I'll love to kind of give you like the right answer there.
Yeah, so we have another question from Adrian. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if this question was asked earlier, but so just wondering hi Mo. What motivated you to start Spenmo? Like, how did you identify the need for this platform? Because I mean, like, if you just look at it from a top level side, I mean, a lot of what you're offering is offered by most of the banks, like corporate wise, like transferring money, bills, payment, remittance. I mean, like, a lot of that is already supplied. So what was the motivation there? Because obviously, if you say that the competitive side, there aren't too many, but actually in some ways, if you look at the corporate banking side, they are a competitor of yours, with the exception that they do lending and you guys don't do yet. Yeah.
Exactly. So like, I think the way we kind of think about it is that, which is why like, when somebody is asking like, do I kind of worry about my tech, digital back startup VC-backed competitors? Like, actually, no. We take share away from banks, right? A lot of people are doing bill pay like the old method, right? Which is like, if I get an invoice. So the things that we can do, like a bank can't do, is really on the software side of things, which is like once an invoice comes in and someone is uploaded, you kind of think about your bank portal, right? You know, let's say you're Nindo, use the BCA bank portal. The BCA bank portal for transfers looks like it's basically from like the 1990s, like an MS-DOS version of it, right? So, you know, it's very, very manual. And one of the things they want to do is centralize all the ways from like payment initiation approval systems, scheduling the payment, processing it, and then basically sending it back to your accounting software. What banks do is basically just one part of the AP journey, which is making out the payment. So I think that's something that we kind of found out is that the AP process for like the CFO, the entire closing the accounts payable process, for it, making the payment out of the bank is actually just one tiny sliver of the step. A large part of it is like communication that today happens on like emails, Slack channels. You know, I'm pretty sure all of you guys have been through that horrendous kind of email thread, which is like if you spend something on the company to get email approval, hey boss, can I expense this? You CC finance team, you CC a bunch of other guys. Everybody has to say, okay, you get in your payroll like 2 months later. All those things can be kind of solved with software, right? If there's the invoice initiation happens on Spenmo, the approval systems happen in Spenmo, the scheduling, the processing, the payment happens on the same system. And then if your system is talking to the accounting software as well, then your AP process can actually be done within like one compound system, right? So I think that's the way we kind of think about it. And it's a great way to kind of think about it, which is like, we're actually stealing market share away from banks. Like, you know, a lot of people, when we onboard them, they're using banks and, you know, the bank portals to do this, and we just offer them like a more effective way to do these things, especially if they're scaling their business.
Yeah, Adrian, do you have any follow-up questions?
I think that answers it. Maybe just one more. So obviously currently our company uses Spenmo. So just wondering, yeah. So actually we use you guys for that. So the question is actually like I noticed like when we put, let's say, the company's cash, all of a good chunk of it in Spenmo, and we use it to pay, so on and so forth. And obviously knowing the regulations very well in Indonesia, technically, is that money that we're putting in, are you borrowing an e-money license right now? Or what are you using? Or is it just a typical bank account?
Yeah, so actually we use like a few payment gateway licenses, right? Like license providers. So that's how we basically like hold your money.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So we won't be PGs to hold your money. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it wouldn't make sense for you to go the e-money route. Because
exactly.
The e-wallet. Yeah. I feel like it's a race. I feel like it's a race to zero.
I think so, because like it's hard to make money. Like, you know, obviously like I came from Grab and I saw the Grab pay journey and all those things.
Yeah.
I think building like a whole closed loop system, like it's very expensive and you honestly don't make a lot of money, which is why we're trying to stay away from the e-money path.
Yeah. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. We have another question from Charles.
Yeah, thanks, Mohan.
Hey,
I was just wondering, thanks for all the sharing as well. I was just wondering, like, does Spenmo has any plans to kind of, because when I think of, you keep mentioning that Spenmo is kind of like, you want to center it as a software itself to kind of make the payables experience easier, right? Then does Spenmo, how does it operate in terms of, like, does it integrate with, do you see yourself integrating with like systems like Workday, this kind, where companies, I think big companies, they like to have a certain, they use Workday or whatever, and then they integrate everything there. So is Spenmo going into that route, or you plan to operate as a separate alone? Yeah.
I think our plan is to be a very good system integrator, right? And I think Workday, my gut sense right now is that if a company is using like ERP the size of Workday, it's probably not the right customer for us. We try to go like, again, non-enterprise level. And it's not many like non-enterprise level companies that would use Workday. So definitely not Workday, but like, we have a lot of requests from ERP system operators and, like in accounting systems in India, right? So a lot of the customers have Accurate or Journal or Zahir integrations that they ask for as well, right? And I think, in Southeast Asia is one of those places where there isn't a lot of like global SaaS software on the accounting side that is one, right? So if you go to Indo and you ask people, do you use Xero or like Oracle NetSuite? Most of the SMBs will be like, what is that, right? They use Zahir, or they use, the more tech-savvy ones will use Journal, right? And those are things to win. Every single country has its own version of like Journal, right? In Vietnam, you have Visa and Busy, and then there's its own, own cast of characters, right? So I think our job is to make sure that we understand, again, talking to customers, figuring out like our product market fit in each of the segments, and then figuring out, well, what's their universe of software that we actually need to like plug into, right? And my sense is like not so much the HR software, but ERP and accounting systems are like the main ones that we have to work with.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that, man. And sorry, one last follow-up question. Like, so do you work with fintech companies like TransferWise and all that to kind of like manage the payments?
Yeah, so we work with a few. So like, our job is like, actually like the initial problem we solve for our customers was that when I asked them how they make like an international remittance, right? So we actually sat, like at this point I've spoken to maybe 1,700 CFOs in the region and finance teams.
Yeah.
So I have like actually this Notion page of like all my interviews in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And like, I actually got permission from some of them to actually go and sit with them in their office to just see how they do. Because, if you look at me, I've never been a CFO in my life. I've never actually done day-to-day finance, right? I learned strategic like finance in school, right? So I was like, okay, I need to build a product for finance teams. Let me go and just sit with these guys and actually figure out like what they do, right? So I sat beside these finance teams like day to day, and I asked them like, okay, so you got this invoice that you need to send money abroad for, like, what do you do, right? So this guy goes onto like 6 different websites, like 6 different accounts that he has, TransferWise, Wallex, his bank portals, and all he does in that 15 minutes of logging into different things is to just find the best rate, right? That's like crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, like, why isn't there like an integrator that you can kind of plug into that just kind of aggregates all the best rates and again, and make your life easier, right? So that's the first thing that Spenmo does, which is working with multiple like remittance providers, right? Because again, our job is to reflect the best rate and kind of pick the best route for your money to go, right? We don't actually do the payment ourselves. We work with licensed providers to do it because again, we want to focus on the software. And on the software side, it's really the extraction of the data, right? Once he kind of picks the best guy, without Spenmo, what happens is that he actually goes into each wallet and he actually keys in all the details, right? Because you realize TransferWise, Wallex, Wallex, all these guys, they don't have any OCR capability to actually extract the data. So all this has to be like manually filled out. Then he clicks OK. And then if you think about it, that wallet that he basically sends money from does not talk to his accounting system, right? So he has to extract the data with the invoice that he paid and manually put it into his accounting system. So very quickly, if you kind of talk to customers, you figure out like, hey, what if I build a system that could talk to like 6 or 7 different like international remittance players, right? And we reflect the best rate. And we build software on top that can extract the data, schedule it, process it. And once it's done, most importantly, send it back to close his books, right? Then it's like really like a 10x experience. So I think that's the way we kind of thought about it, which is like, we're agnostic on players, like on remittance platforms. If people want to come and build with us, we're more than happy to if they can give the best rates to our customers.
Got it. Okay. Thanks so much, Mohan. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Charles.
I think we have one more question from Amar here. If not mainly from fintechs, do you think there could be competition from other SaaS platforms like Journal, Zero?
Yeah, I think it's so one of the 2 rules at Spenmo, right? I think you heard the number 1 rule at Spenmo is like don't become a bank. Another rule that we have is don't become accounting software. And I think like when we look logistically at like Zero, I think it's a great product, but there's just like so much meat in accounting that it's very hard to focus and build something else, right? So like, I think it's, again, coming back to focus, right? Like, I don't think accounting software has kind of backtracked into building a great payables experience. Nobody has done it. Doesn't mean nobody can. But I think it's highly unlikely when our accounting partners are trying to expand into new markets. And accounting is a product where there's like a lot of updates all the time, right? Because your accounting software has basically get you ready for tax and audit season. And there's always changes around tax and audit season of like reporting, right? And if you kind of think about it, Xero has been a listed company. They've been around for like maybe 10 to 15 years. And they have not done anything, honestly, more than accounting, right? Because it's just such a massive product to build. So I think, again, in terms of focus, I wouldn't worry so much. I wouldn't lose sleep over them. Even if they try to do it, they could. But I think it's just, for them, it would just be like one tiny product module. But for us, it's the entire product. And we're obviously going to be a lot more hungry there.
Yeah, interesting. Kent, you have another question?
Yes. Thanks, Jess, for giving me that chance to ask my, I guess, final question. Indeed, it's a very interesting product, and I wonder that in the near term, right, and probably that means, I guess, in the next 6 to 12 months, are you looking at expanding the product into any other function lines? Maybe you can paint a little bit like your thoughts around the product roadmap in the near term, and also like if not, then at what point would you think about building, potentially an extension of product? And what would be the next, I guess, most complementary thing to what you're building now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think first, we just have a lot of things right now on our plate, just like getting the Payables product up to speed. I think we have a lot of things to do. So I think honestly, for the next 1 year, whatever you see on the site and whatever you see on our product is what you're gonna get. And it's going to be better versions, right? I think a lot of what I kind of talked to the team about and promising the business is just that we try to get investors on board who understand the value of product quality. Because I think we built for a certain segment of customers where getting the product from 80% ready to 95%, 100% ready actually makes a huge difference for them, right? Because CFOs are the guys who are the most risk averse in any company, and the bar for them to adopt a new product is really, really high, right? So I think for us, I don't think we're going to add any functional lines or new products. It's really just going to be about going deep and doing what we do better today, right? Better than today. We can do a lot of things, which is why we're hiring a lot of product engineering guys. If anybody is on the call who's looking for the next gig, feel free to drop me a note. We're always looking for great talent, right?
Cool. Thanks for answering that.
Thanks a lot, guys.
And actually, if I may add one last one, if I may add one last one, I would be curious about what's the aspiration you have, right? How many customers are you looking to acquire in a year or so? How fast can this kind of model grow?
I mean, this model can be huge, right? Nothing on Spenmo itself. We can't look at Brex, right? Brex or Ramp, all these guys. Basically, I think Brex is 4 years old now at this point. They've acquired 10,000 businesses, right? In basically 4 years. If you look at Ramp, they've been around for 2 years. They're close to 5,000 companies. And I think Southeast Asia on its own will be much bigger than that, right? If you kind of look at TAM wise, it's just massive. And a lot of it is about go-to-market, which we talked about. If you get the go-to-market right, the execution right, then it should be a no-brainer.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Guys, thanks a lot for taking time on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, I think we will have. Do you have more time, Mohandass?
Oh, I actually got to jump off. I have another call at 9.
Okay, so maybe you can close off with one last question. I'm just curious, you've given us so many tips on go-to-market strategy, team building, and prioritization. How do you make difficult decisions as a founder? Do you have any framework you can share with us?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of it is we take data quite seriously. So one of the first steps you should do when you can is build out a strong data team, so that a lot of decisions you can make can be substantiated with data, and then it makes your life easier, right? You're not thinking about hypothetical scenarios. But I think for difficult decisions, I think one of the things that have been useful is to kind of ask myself, is this decision something if I take now, can it be reversed, right? Because if it can be reversed and the impact is negligible, if I can reverse it on time, then you do it now. You just go and do it, right? You ask why not, and you just go into the crowd and you run an experiment and you try to do it, right? But something that's do or die, I don't know, something that if you do, you can't undo it, right? Then it's something that will need some time, and a lot of the framework has been having a good management team, a support system to make decisions together, right? I think collaborative team thinking and decision making is something that we can keep quite strongly. Usually when you make decisions of which new product to launch, which new country to go to, those are not questions that are easily answered with data, because those are things again, not substantiated with data, right? When you try to launch a new country, you can do the consultant style, TAM sizing, market opportunity and all that. But again, it kind of comes up to gut, right? Why do we launch Indo? A lot of investors say Indo sucks. This model will not take off in Indo. They'll stick to mature markets, go to Hong Kong, go to Australia, right? But a lot of the decision making, that was say a mixture of gut plus some data. And I love Indo, so I think some sort of soft space for Indo, soft spot for Indo, right? So I think decision making at that point in time, when you can use data. If not, rely on your team. And if it's reversible, just do it now. Pull the plug and do it now. If it's not reversible, you got to take a stab, right? I think the worst thing you can do is to be indecisive. I think it's probably one of the worst things you can do as a founder, is to be indecisive on things. So we try to be decisive, move quickly. If you can do it, do it. If not, talk to your team and then move on with it, right? It's going to be important for you. There's a lot of decisions, there's a lot of forks in the road that you have to take.
Thank you so much, Mo, for your time.